Okay. Thank you. And welcome to the Government Operations Committee for October 21st. We do have a quorum. Commissioner Davenport, Commissioner Denson, Commissioner Link are here, and Commissioner Edwards may be joining us shortly. Tonight, we're going to talk about our Parklet program. We've utilized these Parklets for the COVID time, and certainly they've been helpful to businesses, and we're exploring how we can continue to be helpful. The first thing on the item, though, is to approve the minutes from the September 23rd meeting. So if I can get a motion for that, we'll move forward.
So move.
Thank you, Commissioner Link. Second, anybody second? Thank you, Commissioner Denson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, tonight on the agenda is the consideration of the extension of the Parklet program that the mayor signed on April 6th, and Andrew Saunders, our Central Services Director, is here, along with Angel Hemley, who does a good job helping us with a lot of events and stuff downtown, and Austin and Sherry from the attorney's office, and of course Josh Edwards from the manager's office. So Andrew and Josh, y'all sent out a bunch of questions for us to look over, and maybe the way to start is to have Andrew. I'm assuming everybody had a chance to read the questions. I don't want to take up Andrew's time going point by point with the questions. I think he laid out some areas that they looked at that do this sort of thing, and raise some good points. However y'all want to proceed is fine by me. Andrew, if you just want to hit the high points of the questions.
If it's all right, let me give a little context to what we've got.
Okay.
So with the onset of the pandemic and the closure of most indoor spaces, there was this urgent need to make sure that we could facilitate safer options in an outdoor environment. And so we put together a pilot program specific to restaurants that would allow them to set up these spaces in the on-street parking, which was a fairly low-used product at the time. And it proved to be pretty successful. Angel may know the exact number. I think we maybe had upwards of 10 permit holders at one time. And we were really looking for low barrier. So what was kind of, they could choose their own adventure a little bit on cost and visibility. We gave them a light framework to operate under. And I will note that we have had almost no management issues with them, which was a big concern, that people would just be buck wild within their parklets. And we found that Athens has handled it pretty well. And so now, as this has been identified as a potential amenity to retain in the community, the question is, what changes, if any, might you all desire or recommend? As I assume what's being considered for an ordinance would be the most appropriate way to extend this. And so I want to give a shout out to Gavin and Angel. Angel lives and dies within this, because she's the one who has to engage with the businesses and go through permitting. And with Gavin, we're able to rely on his planning background and knowledge about what it takes to bring, like, say, a deck through as a permit. And so they've helped to put together this, and they've looked at other communities and kind of brought you that summary table at the end of here's what other communities do. And so before we made any assumptions and went to start writing ordinances, we felt like there were kind of 10 things we needed to hear from you all, because they all influence design, use, and the kinds of regulations that might appear into an ordinance. And so now that we've primed the pump, I'll just start. We've got a lot of different businesses downtown. The Parklet pilot program is explicitly available to restaurants. There was a lot of discussion about bars, and we never made that jump. And so as we look at a long-term product, I think Angel may know of, there's one community, you don't even have to be a business owner. You could just be an interested citizen that wants to sponsor a Parklet. So as you look at what types of businesses could possibly use this, are you all considering that we would stay restaurants only, or that we might expand it?
I have my opinions, but I'll let the other committee members go first. Melissa, I think I heard you.
Yeah, I mean, I am interested in having a conversation about allowing small occupancy, low occupancy bars to participate in the program with maybe stricter parameters. You know, maybe an early cutoff date for service out there or something. But you know, I'm interested in having that conversation.
That's a good point.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm fine leaving it the way we have it. I think if we open it up to bars or specific bars, we may invite a lot of controversy and conflict between the big boys and the little players, and it just seems a little bit like a mess to me. I think it's working pretty good how it is now.
Right. I think both of those are good points. My concern too would be, you know, a lot of times, well, bar activity is usually a nighttime activity, and my concern is that you would have the parklets taking up spaces for obviously retail spaces during the day, and you know, no activities going on in the parklet, but yet a parking space is taken up that perhaps another business could benefit by. You know, I think, I don't know, and maybe you would see the management issues if bars, without being specific as to size or whatnot, would surface in that regard. Okay.
Commissioner Hamby?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I would, and I like the points that were made about the bars and the retail establishment, but just for me, I still during the time of while we still continue to go through COVID, I'd rather see some of the patrons that are inside these bars to be outside, just because for me, consciously, it makes me feel better that we're not spreading COVID. Even though this part of the program probably will be permanent, I still think there's some benefits for even just in the present time and in the future, that there's some benefits for the bars to participate in the Parklet program as well.
I think I agree with Commissioner Davenport. And then again, I went through like the example ones on here, and my understanding is that all of these other cities that were looked at all allow bars also. So it seems to be successful with them. I think it's good points about you know, bar activity being mostly at nighttime, and I understand that. So, but I think maybe we could have it where there's more limitation on how many spots they could take up, or something like that. But I think it's something for us to look into.
And not to debate the issue, so to speak, but I will point out that, and Angel does a good job and she did a good job here too of providing some examples. I don't know that a lot of communities are doing stuff like this, which is fine. I don't mind doing things other communities are doing, but the examples given are really large cities, so they're not college towns like we are, and I guess I do worry about the management of the situation, and of course, like I said, taking up spaces during daytime for primarily nighttime uses.
Yeah.
And two, and just one more point, if you don't mind, Commissioner Link. I don't know if the bars have lowered their capacity for indoor. I mean, Commissioner Davenport brought up having people outside. I don't know if have people changed their business models, but because of that, or are they still allowing the same sort of capacity in the bar regardless?
I think once the governor's emergency order expired and they were allowed full capacity, you know, a lot of the ones, especially that cater to the college crowd, they went back to full capacity. But there are, you know, other bars are still being really careful, and, you know, especially ones that are able to have some outdoor seating are very much limiting. Some of the ones on the west side of downtown are still, you know, limiting capacity and, you know, mandating masking. things like that.
It may be a more middle ground compromise could be if the bar also offers some other activity, like a music venue, or I don't know. I'm just trying to I'm trying to just think out loud here, which is probably dangerous.
Well, I mean, I was kind of mulling over some of this stuff, and maybe there could be an option where it looks like in some of these other cities, some of these are temporary permits just in the warmer months, which we have pretty palatable weather year round here, but maybe there could be an option for weekend permits, weekend temporary parklet permits for small capacity bars, kind of allow them entry into the program at, a kind of more reduced access. That might relieve some pressure, for some of these smaller capacity bars that can really get overflowing or negatively impacted when we have, football weekends or whatever.
I mean, that sounds like a reasonable option as well. I guess I'm still struggling with how do you, I mean, I guess you could judge it based on allowed capacity.
Yeah.
But will that draw some legal issues?
I mean, I also think that, we could maybe establish a permanent parklet program for our restaurants and then come up with kind of a more limited access program for small capacity bars and call that a temporary kind of pilot program. See how it goes for 6 months or so, or a year maybe, since the coming months will be cold. Maybe we move forward with a permanent program for restaurants, but develop something more temporary and limited for small capacity bars and see how it works. I'd like to have a conversation with our police force about their concerns. I don't believe they've had any problems with the Washington Street Parklet, which does cater to bars, or I mean that's a different retail area. It's not in the Parklet program. But I would like to hear some of the concerns that the police might have, with underage alcohol consumption or whatever. That might offer them some challenges and see if those challenges have actually existed.
Mr. Chair, may I add two things briefly?
Yeah, sure, please.
If restaurants are a yes, and that seems pretty universal, I would suggest you might also consider what we're calling specialty shops. We ran into this specifically with Sidewalk cafes, where you can have an item like a Ben & Jerry's or a Jittery Joe's or a Condor Chocolates that may not technically be a restaurant, but their main business is the sale of some kind of food or drink. And so you might want to consider folding those in.
I agree. I think they should be folded in.
And then the bars, I'm hearing mixed results. We can certainly chew on it. What I would suggest is let's move through some of these other items, because as you get deeper into parklets, you may suddenly find some clarity around whether or not you want to do weekend parklets or the density that could be used. So we can kind of take that both directions if we need to.
If I could jump in with one more thing on the potential of the bars, something for us to consider, I guess, would be, because I think Commissioner Hamby brings up a good point about the hours, but maybe if it was where, like a lot of these sidewalk cafes, their furniture is brought in at nighttime, brought out. I did a job like that for a while for a cafe. So it could possibly be where the parklets only operate during certain hours at nighttime, and therefore all the furniture has to be brought back in so that the parking spaces can still be utilized during the daytime for retail.
And I appreciate you saying that, Commissioner Nissen, because I don't want us to discount, certainly what we're always trying to do is create a mixture of opportunities for businesses downtown, and retail's an important component of it. And I'd certainly like to see more retail staying open later at night from that standpoint. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I also think consideration to be given is just and I know we don't like to talk about this as much, but our general fund does generate quite a bit of revenue from parking proceeds. So we don't want to discount what that means to our general fund as well. And I don't, maybe Andrew and Angel could put together some numbers for us as to the impact of that on our general fund.
I think there were some numbers in here about how much revenue the average parking space generates, and I would say that we would structure any fees to meet that revenue loss.
That's a good point. I didn't see that part, Commissioner Lane, but thank you.
I think it amounts to, $300 a month or something like that.
It's about $2,800 a year per space, average space in downtown.
Yeah.
Well, that does lead into the second item, which is size. So the current program has a minimum of 2 spaces, a maximum of 4, and it requires some neighboring business support if you're going to go large. And we've seen a mix. We've seen some 2s, some 4s. Certainly, the bigger they are, maybe the more useful they are, but that also is more impact on parking. Angel, looking at your sheet, it looks like most communities do kind of cap it at 2.
Yeah.
That what you've seen?
Yeah.
I personally think it needs to be more than 2, but just one vote.
What are the number of spaces? Like now we allow the expanse of the storefront, right? Is that
no, ma'am, not entirely.
Okay.
You're guaranteed 2 spaces regardless of your storefront. If you would like to go up to 4, you need support from your neighbors.
Okay, so we do allow more than 2, at least 2. Like nobody's going under 2. Nobody's just having 1 space.
Right.
Out of the 10, how many are using 4?
I don't have a list in front of me. Maybe 2 or 3, not many.
Trapeze.
Yeah.
Trapeze, South Bar,
Paloma.
National, right?
National, I think, uses 2 or 3.
We're at National, I think, stuck at 2.
They're on parallel spaces, so
Right.
they're longer.
Paloma does.
So let's say 40 to 50% of our current permittees are utilizing 4 spaces.
All right, then. Well, maybe that's a question we need to look at. Okay.
I would think that for the restaurants, I agree. I think that just like going, I mean, I've like at South, I mean, I've used that space there, and they use the space well. If they were to have to do like 2 spaces there, it would really be a strict limitation on how many tables they could have out there. So maybe for like if we're talking about going different directions, maybe the restaurants, we allow up to 4, but the specialty shops, and if we decide to let bars in, maybe we have it like more at 2, have some tiers there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry. I was picturing a space bigger than what it is. So
Yeah, because I mean, a restaurant, you need, you probably want at least a 4-top table. And people are getting served full meals, so that takes up some space.
If we go with 4, are you still? I would suggest actually that you still keep the neighboring business provision, and that's because there's just weird alignments, right? And so I think it creates more of a sense of cooperation amongst the businesses if they know how their neighbors' actions impact them.
I agree. I think that's a good provision. I mean, I think that the policy as it stands, I think it's been working pretty well. Do y'all, is there any reason why we would change it when it comes to the number of spaces?
I'm fine with it. I guess again, just going back to my concern is I don't want to see inactivity during the day when, and so like Commissioner Denson's mentioned, I mean, again, this leads to some other questions Andrew is going to bring up here. People put a lot of, like some of the parklets look better than some of the other ones. And we certainly want to make it aesthetically. We're doing a lot of work downtown to try to make it look better. So we don't want to mess that up with some haphazard parklets being put up. And I don't know, Andrew. You have any thoughts? I don't know where to go.
Let us explore it a bit. It might be that if you're using 4, there's some minimum service hours that need to be provided. And another item that we've had, so one minor challenge is if businesses have a parklet and they're occupying the space and then they weren't really using it.
Right.
And we saw a couple of them then eventually just take it up. But I think a good policy would have some expectations of use, not that we're going to go out and count it on the daily, but you just don't want it to be derelict or taking up otherwise valuable space. So those have been almost the only issue we've had has been just use.
Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, I would propose that we have shorter term leases on these. Instead of an annual permit, make it more of a biannual or even quarterly. Just because you do have businesses change out, and also it's less of a financial impact on the businesses to have to produce the half a year's worth of fees rather than a whole year's at once. I mean, they have to produce their alcohol fees all at once.
Well, and to that point, Melissa, they may find it doesn't work for them. So
yeah, exactly. So they can, if it doesn't work for them, it's not like they're stuck with a year's worth of fees.
All right, we can definitely make that note.
Any other commissioners have any thoughts as Andrew's moving along here? Go ahead, Andrew. You may lead us in a different direction.
Yeah, let's see if anybody else have anything about size. Okay, the next one I think you've kind of answered, food and alcohol. So if you're going to have restaurants, certainly I would suggest food should be allowed. I know that alcohol is a major revenue driver for some of those businesses. So I might ask the attorney's office to weigh in. I know we had to modify our open container requirements, and I can't remember if that's permanent or if that was just a factor of the emergency declaration. But there's a nuance of being able to cross a public space with a beverage. So, Austin or Sherry, can y'all provide some guidance on what it means if the desire is to allow alcohol?
Yeah, I absolutely can do that. So, the issue is that there is no state. Well, let me back up. So we have a local open container law, and we certainly could modify that to say, for instance, that the entire downtown area allows you to carry an open beverage. But it is extraordinarily difficult to modify it on a location by location approach. And as Andrew mentioned, you're crossing a public street, like even if it's just a public sidewalk to get to one of these parklets. And so that's why we ran into the problem of trying to make sure that if they're serving alcohol, it's on their property.
But in the emergency declaration, don't we allow service within 100 feet? Is that the compromise that we landed on? And if so, would that be something that should be considered to be abandoned or possibly retained?
No, I think you're right, and I didn't work on that particular part of the declaration terribly much. Could we maintain it? I think my instinct is to say probably. I would want to, have a caveat to that, but I want to think about it and talk about it with Judd and Austin. But that's not typically how other communities have done it in the long run. Like Savannah, for instance, has a whole river district, for instance, whereas open container.
I'm fine with doing open container if y'all want to. That opens up another can of worms, but
it does.
If it makes it easier.
For it.
Does the wording could I'm just thinking, like, if we use the word consume, still prohibit consumption on that public right of way. I mean, if you're carrying a beverage, just across the few feet of sidewalk to the parklet space, if the language could be written so it's still prohibited to consume that beverage in that right of way.
This is coming from a non-drinker, by the way.
Well, I did work on this a bit with other individuals at the attorney's office, and we really dove into this a lot on College Square. And I remember there were a couple of things at the time staff were really wanting to be attentive to. The first was, my understanding was, it had to be an exclusive use area is what they really wanted. So, for example, if I own a pizza restaurant, my delivery of alcohol needs to be in a space where I regulate the customers. Otherwise, what if the neighboring sushi restaurant lets their customers run amok? Who do you pin that to? And so that was one barrier for College Square. And then the other, I believe the current policy doesn't allow, I think it may actually require staff to deliver that beverage. So you wouldn't necessarily just openly tote it out the door as a customer. But what I'm hearing, though, is if you all are interested in alcohol, we need to be able to circle up, give the attorney's office some time to make recommendations on what that would look like and what cascading effects could occur from that.
Yeah, we can bring that back next meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
When you brought up open container downtown, from when to when? Maybe a time limit?
For the parklets? Or
no, for open container. Is that viable? Like, we allowed open container downtown from, I don't know.
Personally, I don't know. I think we'd have to hear from our police officer on this. I personally wouldn't mind seeing. I don't know if it'd make it easier for them or what, but I would think we'd have to put a time limit on it.
Yeah.
I mean, other cities do it. Savannah. I mean, I don't know.
It's used to do it. I remember my first football weekend in Athens. I was trying to get to the library and had to bust through a swarm of drinking in the sidewalk folks.
Well, I'm open. Yeah. I'm open to the conversation. Thinking about what time limits we might impose on it. Yeah. I don't know, 8 p.m., 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. or something like that.
Right. Well, some of us go to bed at 8, so you have to make it earlier than that. So.
And I think thinking about this assignment to GOC, it's really in the nature of, is it necessary to do this so that parklets can serve alcohol?
Right. It may be a
broader question.
Well, and it may be an addendum to our report to the full commission that this needs to be looked at in a more broader discussion.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to, excuse me. So for the alcohol, the consumption of alcohol, I would rather just separate that and just focus on just the parklet themselves.
That's where we're going. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay.
If I could speak to that really fast, I think that we since we did the sidewalk cafe ordinance, last year, whatever, I really feel like the parklet ordinance for alcohol, or parklet basically for serving, should mirror the sidewalk cafe ordinance for consistency, especially since the uses are basically the same. So we allow drinks to be served. I think there are some restrictions on how they're served on the sidewalk cafe ordinance, and I would urge us to try to mirror those same restrictions for the parklet ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with sidewalks, you could just go to the bar and order and go out on the sidewalk cafe.
And the difference with that, again, comes down to exclusive control. So when you leave the business door and walk into their sidewalk cafe, you don't really cross, quote unquote, the public property. And most of those cafes, so far, everyone we've permitted has a defined boundary that's attached to the business. For example, I believe we can't serve alcohol even on the sidewalk cafes on College Square because of this older pre-existing rule about carrying it across.
Well, maybe our attorneys can put their heads together.
Yeah.
Something to think about. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was thinking maybe if part of the Parklet lease terms could include the sidewalk geographically, but also provide prohibitions against placing any obstacles on that sidewalk, so they could rent it and arguably have exclusive control, but not be allowed to put any obstacles on it.
Right. Good suggestion if it works. Okay, Andrew, you moving along here?
Could I ask one quick question? I'm so sorry. I remember doing a whole lot of work on this, and I apologize that my memory is somewhat fuzzy, but I just want to clarify what we're researching, because if you look at the Savannah model, for instance, there's no actual off-premises sales. In other words, they're selling them in their establishment, but you can walk out with the drink. And I've heard kind of both of those conversations today. Maybe that we want to be able to serve out off premises. So I just wanted to clarify: are we interested in both of those things, or only one of those things?
From what I understand, Sherry, we're just looking at how they could be applicable to the parklets for now, but the broader discussion may come later.
Okay.
If the mayor includes it as part of the assignment.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to the next item, kind of the duration of the permit. So heard from y'all a desire for quarterly permit fees in case somebody wants to opt out or whatnot, which I think is wise. We see some communities only allow a parklet to be during a specific season. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is most importantly weather. So the communities that you see do that maybe don't have great winter weather. There is also just a public service component of it that if you need to restripe a street or access a utility line, you have a dedicated period in which that can happen. On the other hand, that does put a burden to those permittees that they're going to have to be able to mobilize and demobilize. And before I go into this, there's one thing I want to point out. I think it'll come up in a little bit. When we started the pilot program, in a sense of emergency, we really did try to just what was the most effective and cheapest way you could get something going, right? So we have seen literally parklets with cinder blocks and 2x4s, and we've seen parklets with incredible design. There's two things that are not addressed within the current program that really probably need some attention. The first is actually ADA access. Is there a requirement, or even if it's not a requirement, is it our policy that we want parklets to be accessible by everybody? Because if that's the case, we're seeing most communities build almost like a deck that is set into the street so that there is level access directly from the sidewalk into the parklet. That obviously comes with an expense and a significant operational impact, and it definitely would probably negate the ability to say take up parklets at a certain time of day. The other is the one that I do worry about, and luckily we've had no issues, which is the safety of the occupants inside. So while you probably don't need, battering ram proof designs, small castles upon themselves, we may want to get Public Works to weigh in on do we need to increase visibility or durability of those outer perimeters just to deter interactions between patrons and vehicles. And so those two things are likely to result in a parklet that is beefier and harder to mobilize. If that's your sport, you may hear this from us and say, no, we're not concerned about either of those issues. We like it the way it is because it makes Athens funky. And if that's the case, then there's more flexibility. But with those kind of priming that pump, is there preference versus an option to have a parklet year round or a mandated parklet season?
I think year-round is good for our climate. I don't see any reason. I mean, you get 75-degree days in December, so and spring starts in February. I really don't see any reason to limit the season. And as far as design, you know, I'd like to see it be, you know, as minimal as and accessible as possible. Maybe we put up some, you know, slight parameters where we're discouraging cinder blocks and 2x4s, but you know, we also make it affordable and encourage creativity.
And I'm sure there's different ways you can build a ramp or build a portable ramp if it needs to be taken up or something like that to accessible. It's got to be accessible. There's no doubt about that, no question about that. So I had mixed feelings about the yearly thing versus seasonal thing, but others can weigh in if they choose.
I agree about the ramps. I was thinking the same thing, that we should be able to come up with some kind of model of ramp that we could approve, you know, that will be less burdensome than building a whole entire deck.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, for the seasonal, I guess I would prefer for it to be available year round, possibly. But maybe there's some differences, maybe even like differences for fees. Like I could see like the summer months, like we wanted to put like 3 months though when school's not in session. Normally that those months are cheaper to do because there's not as many people here, but also because the parking is not necessarily quite as needed because there's a smaller population here. So maybe having something like that. And I guess I would also be okay though if we had maybe one designated month. Maybe we did turn that one off, kind of like what you were saying, Andrew, in case we needed maintenance or something like that, and that could be the month that we always shoot for.
I like, excuse me, I like year round, make it easy for our businesses. Instead of them looking at the clock and the calendar and saying, oh, we gotta, it's more uniform. And when it comes to ramp design, I'm indifferent. But I do like the 1 month off for maintenance.
Okay, I think if we find workarounds on the ramp, it definitely allows us to designate a month where it's a no-go. And I mean, quite honestly, February might make a great month because it's rainy and cold. But I think you've given us enough to come back to you with some options.
I think in regards to annual or seasonal, y'all, though, I do think we ought to build into this ordinance some sort of sunset clause for us so that we can come back in a year to just see how it worked, what sort of problems central services or police department or somebody faced, and just, I know we've done that before with different ordinances and policies to where we have an opportunity to say, okay, is this working? Do we want to continue it? Do we want to make changes to it or whatnot? So any thoughts on that? And the impact. I just think it would be, you know, it's just a checks and balances sort of thing to see if it's working or if it's causing some issues.
I think it's a good idea maybe to set a date for staff to come back to us with a report that chronicles any they have or suggestions for improvement. You know, after 6 months or so, before the renewal for the next year would be up.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say is before we issue the renewals and we have that report from staff that allows or doesn't allow us to continue. I don't know. I just want to make sure we're thinking through all and not, because we may not realize all the consequences associated with this right off the bat.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay. Andrew, what else you got here? I know you got to
shifting to kind of that design. So what I'm hearing from you all is that at least on the structure side of things, that if we can make sure that it's visible to minimize those vehicle interactions and accessible even through something like a ramp, you don't want us to require they be over-engineered. Now, that wouldn't prohibit somebody from making a really beefy, impressive parklet, but from that aspect, relatively low barrier would remain. Along those same lines would be landscaping. So in some communities, landscaping is optional, and in some cases, it's required with very significant requirements. I will tell you from the department that manages the landscape in downtown settings, it is difficult, it is expensive, and if it's not done, it's almost uglier than no landscape at all. So
Yeah, I agree. I don't think landscaping should be required. You know, I think these businesses could be motivated enough to attract people to their parklets, you know, with good design, unique design that reflects their aesthetic, rather than being required to throw out some potted plants that may or may not stay alive. I mean, a dead potted plant is a hell of a lot uglier than a cinder block, honestly.
I agree. And I kind of think, too, if we're trying to create a situation to where these could be, I'm thinking of MASH. I don't know if y'all remember the show MASH, where they were able to bug out when they needed to. You know, certainly if we're creating some in the ordinance, if there is some sort of requirement about daytime versus nighttime use and such as that, then we want to make it easy if they are just using it at night to be able to set it up and take it down and such as that. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the direction we're heading in, but just thinking in those terms.
okay, so I'm hearing landscape optional. Density and locations can be as complicated or as easy as you want it to be. So right now, we cannot allow parklets on Broad Street because it's Georgia DOT and they're probably not as cool as we are. And then also we do not permit parklets in ADA parking spaces for obvious reasons. I would certainly recommend those two things remain. What you come into, though, is we've had a really nice kind of natural distribution where you end up with maybe one per block, or in a rare case, there might be two. But that may not always be the case. So if you're allowing up to 4 spaces, well, what happens when there's 3 businesses that want 4 spaces, or, you know, whatever that might be on the same block? And then also, I would suggest that we should at least chat with the fire department about access to the hydrant system downtown. But kind of going to that size location, is there a desire to set a cap of a percentage of spaces on a block or some other mechanisms to manage density, or is the thought that you just kind of roll with it and see what happens?
I don't think it's a bad idea to set a cap. I mean, you know,
what's the densest block right now?
Probably Lower Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And what percentage is that one?
Give me a minute. I'll take a look while y'all chat about it.
Maybe we can set the cap on what the densest block is right now, since that's clearly palatable.
It's a good suggestion.
Washington's a unique case in that it has that extra lane. I mean, we basically closed down a lane to accommodate the outdoor retail area, whereas parklets are strictly parking spaces.
Yeah, but still on that block, the parking spaces are also being utilized and not being able to use for parking, so it is kind of the same. I was kind of looking at, because I know I definitely take the point that a lot of the examples we have are larger cities, except for the last one, Milwaukee, Oregon, and they have more restrictions on the number of spaces that are able to be utilized downtown. Total number of spaces. They have a lot of actual restrictions on how dense they could be. So maybe if we came up with a good number that was like, you know, certain percentage of spaces available on each block, and the way that we dealt with it was, you know, when you apply per season or annually, however it's going to be, that if there's multiple ones, then, like, I don't know, we pull some kind of random lottery to see who gets it, just to kind of suffice that. But I mean, I agree. I mean, we need to have some kind of restriction to make sure that we still have parking available in certain blocks. And,
Well, I think with our vendor sidewalk ordinance, like if you're just selling hot dogs or jewelry on the sidewalk, it's don't we have like it's a first come first serve amount that
And it makes me miserable. It is on Angel and Gavin and I's to-do list to revisit that, because what happens is it's first come first serve, and then you're grandfathered in. And so as long as you keep renewing that, it never provides anybody an opportunity to take advantage. So I like the commissioner's discussion about if you cap density, and if that cap is reached, we need to have some mechanism that provides consideration of somebody who's excluded into the coming year.
Maybe there'd be a lottery system or something once in a while.
Could I chime in really quickly?
Sure.
Sure. I just wanted to say really quickly, just something to think and to bear in mind is that whenever we come up with this policy, whatever it is, the important thing is that it cannot be arbitrary and capricious. So we've got to come up with some sort of reasoning for why some folks will get it, whether that's a first come serve or whether that's some other reason. But that's the key phrase, cannot be arbitrary and capricious. So just bear that in mind as we're thinking about options.
So is a lottery considered arbitrary and capricious?
I would have to research that specific question. My worry is that, that it might be seen as arbitrary, but I don't know that for sure. There might be an argument that
arbitrary. It's the luck of the draw. Arbitrary.
Right. I'm not familiar with anything that tells me that isn't, but again, I would need to research it. So Austin and I are going to be working on this, and that will be something we'll be happy to look into.
Okay, y'all, we've got about 5 minutes left, and Andrew may have a few more points here to make. So let's work through this. I think we've given our attorneys a lot to come back with us on, and we certainly go. Thank you, Andrew.
So support from neighboring businesses. We heard earlier a desire to allow up to 4. I would certainly recommend to you that if that's the case, they should maybe have support. We do not require support from neighboring businesses for the base 2. So that is, somewhat of a vested right of you're a business owner downtown, therefore you are entitled to 2 spaces should you want them. But that's, again, businesses feel differently about this. So do we want to just require neighboring support? And Angel or Gavin, I don't know if y'all seen anything. Most of these communities do, in fact, require some form of support.
I think, the way it works now, more than 2 spaces requires support. Isn't that how it works now?
Correct.
I don't see any reason to change that. Does anybody else?
I agree. I think that's kind of a neighborly thing to do. Okay, thank you, Andrew. That one's a move ahead with that one.
So non-conforming activities, I suspect we'll definitely, if y'all desire them, we would want planning and the attorney's office to weigh in on them. But examples. So in the pilot program, we do actually allow you to have a sign attached to your parklet. There's restrictions on its size that identify that it is in fact affiliated with your business. And that certainly is in conflict with the sign ordinance. We also allow for space heaters and outdoor lighting, and we're not cross-checking that outdoor lighting with the outdoor lighting ordinance because it's at this point it's required to be battery powered, so it'd be pretty hard to go nuts with outdoor lighting. So we already have some non-conforming activities. We never did cross-check them. I think if the desire is to retain some of those, we should be sure to work with staff to make sure that there's not unintended consequences.
And again, I kind of think this is continuing the way we are may be the way to go, just to keep it simple. And if we come back within a year, then we'll be able to identify some specifics that we need to address with this.
I agree.
Personally, I think at some point we need to address smoking not only in these but in our outdoor cafes. I mean, it's not real fair to people that don't smoke. They don't have an option of sitting outside if they wanted to. But that's a discussion for a different day, I suppose.
I agree with Mr. Chair about that. I do not want smoking in these areas.
I would agree with that too.
I think that's fine, y'all. I mean, I've had,
Sure.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, so if we do a Parklet program and we ban smoking, all the person is gonna do is just step outside of the Parklet and smoke, and you're still gonna inhale it.
Yeah, you have a point. There's a potential for people to end up blocking the sidewalk to have their cigarette, then stepping back inside the Parklet. We currently, smoking is allowed in the sidewalk cafes, correct?
And it is perhaps the single biggest reason why bars want sidewalk cafes. It is something their customers are looking to do.
If I remember correctly, we took it away though from restaurants.
We did.
Yeah.
So you can only do it for the bar cafes that don't have seating. If I
Well,
remember
maybe
correctly.
we prohibit smoking for the restaurant parklets, but if we're going to consider bars, we allow it for them.
Well,
I mean,
I think I don't know. I think anytime you're around food and people are smoking is probably.
yeah, I mean, food is definitely an issue.
I think we shouldn't allow smoking, and something else that made me think about it, possibly getting around some of the density and crowding concerns, is maybe if we do extend this to, bars or whatever, we could still have it that seating and tables is required for all of these, and having like if you for every space you have to have table and seating for whatever number of people, kind of taking up the space, so that you basically are kind of forcing patrons and the businesses to have to be seated, and that would also limit the number of people that could actually even be in there. And then at the same time, getting rid of smoking to be available there too, because it's seated.
That's a good point. You don't want people just standing around crammed into the space. You definitely want it to be, a seating area.
And I think we can have more discussion on the bar aspect at the next meeting. Certainly, I think we'll need to have input from the police department on the management of that, and certainly, if that were to move forward, I would hope we would put some hours of operation for how that parklet exists. But we'll make sure to have that as part of the next discussion. Okay, Andrew, what's the last thing you got here? Price. We definitely want some price for these, I would imagine.
So just gave you a reference of what the value of a parking space is worth, but
I think it's got to be. I mean, I don't know, y'all. I mean, it's got to be something comparable to that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think setting the fees so they, come out to what the actual parking revenue typically is. I think that's fair. And from what I understand, it's still under $300 a month, right?
That's what it
now
says.
that is per space. So are you envisioning that if it's 4 spaces, it would be $1,000 a month, or?
I mean, the more space you have, the more opportunity you have to have more customers and generate more revenue. I mean,
Andrew, why don't you come back with a recommendation for us on that, if you can?
Okay. Is that okay with everybody else? We would be happy to.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I think that this is, in some ways, an economic development project where, we're expanding the abilities of downtown businesses to earn income and pay employees and create an attractive atmosphere downtown. So I'd be fine diverting from an exact offset of parking revenue, because I think we're getting intangible benefits for what they're developing here in these spaces. Thanks.
Okay, number 10, is that where we're at?
Yes, sir. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. What I'm hearing from you is some research for staff to do about access and alcohol and things of that nature. So that's probably going to be our deliverable for the next meeting. But ultimately, we'll start to draft ordinance language. And the question is, certainly we have current Parklet permit holders that you may want to ask, would they continue to use the program in this format, or all downtown businesses? So just what are your thoughts or desires for additional input to come back to this committee?
I would like to see a survey of the businesses who have taken advantage of the program. And if we could get a list of those businesses, so, maybe some of us could do a little outreach.
Okay, so Andrew, if you could maybe do something like you did last time with the survey and go from there.
Are we talking about my infamous bathroom survey?
Yeah, well, no, I won't go there. that was such a doozy. Yeah.
I mean, there's only a dozen or so of them.
So yeah, maybe something similar.
Maybe, not even like, specific questions, just asking, each business owner to provide a statement on how it's worked for them and if they suggest any improvements or have any problems.
Well, I think in order to be fair too, we need to ask the businesses, during other businesses as well, to see if they.
Yeah, that's true.
Have so maybe just a kind of generic, do you like this or not, sort of thing. So.
I would say for the cost part, it might be good to have a few options just to try to see what would be the highest amount that would really be enticing to folks, because that's one of the things I'm a little concerned about, is that we put a cost on there that's too much, and then basically everybody's like, oh, that's just too much for us to do, and they don't do it. So I want to make sure we get that sweet spot for the cost.
I agree. Did we give y'all enough information?
Angel, Gavin, did you have anything else we're just dying to know?
No, I don't.
Okay, good. Stephanie or Sherry and Austin, y'all good to go?
I think so.
Okay. And well, good. We're wrapping up by 6. Andrew needs to go pick up somebody, and Dune is coming on at HBO here at 6 o'clock. So if y'all are interested in a good sci-fi movie, yeah. I'll take a motion to. Everybody's ready.
I'll move.
Second.
Okay. Thanks, y'all. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Okay. Good night. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.